Thank you very much, Hans. Thank you for having me here today. So my name is Sylvia Breukers. I'm from JuneWorks, and today I will present some of the work that we've done for the Gender and Energy Users Task. And that's work that I have not done together. I've done that together with a colleague, Martin Boekelo, and with Angeliki Ageli from Aalborg University. So both myself and Martin are from JuneWorks. We are a research and advice company. We do research and also support user engagement processes, design participatory processes, all in the area of sustainability transitions. And we do that with starting from a social science background. So today, maybe I should start with some background on the Gender and Energy Task, which the full title is Empowering All, Gender in Policy and Implementation for Achieving Transitions to Sustainable Energy. And this task is designed to address a couple of gaps and barriers that have been identified by previous research. And these gaps are gaps between research and translation to policy, translation gaps between policy and implementation, gender blindness in technology design, and this gender blindness is connected to user blindness since they depend on similar power structures, namely that focus on the production side of the energy system, which has been mainly populated by men historically, has generally been in the center of the energy discussion, while the user side, which touches people of all genders and cultural economic contexts, has been less discussed. This has started to change, of course, not at least with the users TCP work. So the lead of the Gender and Energy Task lies with Chalmers University based in Sweden. And next to Sweden, we have other participating countries, namely Austria, UK, Australia, USA, Netherlands, Ireland, and Denmark. So the aim of this task is to analyze energy policy and technologies from a gender perspective and provide recommendations for policy design and implementation. And the role of JuneWorks, our role, is that we're involved in a case study in the Netherlands on gender and smart grid technology. And we could do that because we're involved in several Horizon projects, which are about smart grids, about residential smart grids. So we have a good access to smart grid pilots in the Netherlands. So to summarize, this Gender and Energy Task is organized in 3 subtasks. I won't read aloud all of this, but as you can see, subtask 3 is about designing inclusive and efficient technological interventions, and that is the subtask that we had a case study in. So we don't have a very large role, but nevertheless we've been able to do quite a lot of interesting work over the past years. And the idea of the 3 subtasks together is that we contribute to the formulation of research-based and gender-aware policies, that we identify barriers for policy implementation and find ways to overcome these, and that we help develop efficient and inclusive design processes and technologies. Some milestones that are being developed or have already been achieved. So there's, for instance, a fact sheet being developed for technology developers to help them be more aware of gender in their design practices. We've done workshops. There's a literature review coming up. We've published ourselves based on this case study that I share with you today, etc. So a lot of work is being done over the past 2 or 2.5 years, I think. So this is the overall, some background information on the overall Gender and Energy Task. And I will now continue to present the results of our work, the Dutch case study. So gender, why gender? Well, let's start with the definition. Gender, by gender, we mean the socially constructed differences between what's considered masculine and feminine and the corresponding roles. unlike sex, which refers to biological differences. So why is this relevant in the study of residential smart grids? Well, these smart grids are implemented in existing contexts where you have household practices and task divisions within household labor and these practices and these role divisions are gendered. So it makes sense to then also address how that affects the introduction of residential smart grids. Another thing is that flexibility arrangements that are enabled by smart grids, they are targeting household behaviors, and the extent to which they target those that perform these behaviors will impact their effectiveness, and gender is likely to play a role in that. And to the extent that flexibility arrangements affect different household members differently, this is likely to have distributional impacts. So in our work also in other projects that we work on where residents in smart grids are involved, gender it has always been something that has come up as being relevant. We found more often that it was men rather than women who engaged with energy and digital technology. So it makes a lot of sense to pay more attention to this. So we started asking people how they experienced the introduction of smart grid systems in their homes, and our work aims to contribute to the discussion of how residential smart grid developments affect and how they are affected by household labor practices. So that was something about gender, but what about smart grids? What is a smart grid? Well, there are like technical definitions which imply that we talk about an all-in-one type of solution that includes energy monitoring and management systems, renewable energy systems, other appliances, storage, smart contracts, smart apps, and interfaces. And these systems, they hold a promise that they support a more efficient use of the energy grid, that they support an increase in the share of renewable energy installed capacities, and that they contribute to a decrease in fossil fuel consumption. So residential smart grids also, they are often presented as a kind of an all-in-one phenomenon, partially a black box that does things to and for existing household practices. However, we also see that residential smart grids still have a long way to go to move from the experimental phase to an established and integrated set of new practices. And therefore, we think it's perhaps more useful to consider smart grids more as socio-technical configurations in the making for some years to come at least, rather than a well-organized, ready-made solution. So in the pilots that we discuss in this presentation, even those smart grids that have been implemented, they are not finalized, they're not finished. They experience all sorts of unexpected challenges in the use phase, but they also are confronted or invited by new opportunities that arise with new markets and new market opportunities. So it's very much in flux, and therefore we propose a more socio-technical definition where we see smart grids as a process, as networks in the making, characterized by both information and energy flows in order to control practices of distributed generation, storage, consumption, and flexible demand. That's borrowed from Wolsing, partially this definition. But such a definition then invites us to understand smart grids as socio-technical systems, and then it opens up discussions about how these practices are imagined and how control is envisaged. So what does it mean when home energy management systems are brought into existing household management contexts? So how do these smart energy systems fit with the context for which they are proposed? We have tried to inquire in this by looking into real-life household experiences. We also did a short literature review that helped us to shape up a conceptual framework, and it can be summarized as follows. So we looked at who does what in the household. When you look at recent work on intra-household dynamics, there are different forms of housekeeping that can be distinguished. So material and cognitive housekeeping. Material housekeeping work is the cleaning, cooking, washing, provision of care, homemaking, etc. And the cognitive housekeeping refers to the organization, the planning and execution of all this, as well as the accompanying mental load that it brings. Digital housekeeping refers to the work and understanding needed to maintain a networked home. And technical and maintenance housekeeping refer to technical and maintenance work in and around the home. Housekeeping tasks, they are unevenly distributed across genders. We know that. That's still the case. It's changing, of course, also. But it is still the case in Western, but also in many non-Western societies, that while cognitive and material housekeeping are more likely to be performed by women, home maintenance, digital housekeeping is more the domain of men. Well, smart grid solutions, they combine digital and energy technologies and the supportive digital technologies for householders. Think of dashboards or other digital interfaces. As we know, they are designed mostly with a male reference model in mind. Jolanda Strengers has written about this in her work on Resource Man. However, while it may be men that predominantly engage with smart energy grids, they are not necessarily the ones who perform the energy-related housekeeping tasks that may need to change. For instance, when demand needs to shift. And this may then result in a gap between digital and material housekeeping practices. That is, when those who are expected to shift housekeeping practices are not the ones that engage with the smart home digital technologies. So with the advent of residential smart grids, more and more is being asked from householders in terms of energy literacy, with an increasing diversity of installations for generation, storage in and around the home. And then on top of that, a digital layer consisting of both hardware devices and software to monitor and manage these flows of information and energy within the home and the community is making demands in terms of digital literacy as well. So, and combined, these present a formidable challenge to most household end users. Yet what we see and what we will show that this challenge is more even a challenge for women than it is for men. So how does interest and expertise about residential smart grids then, how does it build up for different members of the households? That was a question we asked. Because routines and practices within a housekeeping, they are not fixed, but we do know that the more ingrained and embedded they become, the more difficult it will be to renegotiate and change these. And this also goes for the distribution of tasks and that relate to certain areas of expertise. So it makes sense to take a close look at smart grid pilots, being examples of not yet ingrained practices and patterns, to see how interest in and expertise about residential smart grids build up for different members of the household. And that is what we've tried to do. So the what, why, and how of our work. So what did we look at? We looked at the introduction of smart grids in homes and communities and how it affects dynamics within a household and within the community. We did that to improve our understanding of how these residential smart grid configurations shape and challenge and are shaped and challenged by everyday practices. Also, in view of a more citizen and community-centered energy transition, we want to learn how residential smart grids can contribute to community values. And we want to learn how we can improve the effectiveness and the attractiveness of smart grid configurations. I already told you a bit about our analytical lens, namely we focus on the buildup and concentration of smart grid interest and expertise. And we related that to experiences of control, comfort, safety, and trust. By control, we mean feeling in control is about being able to understand, be able to steer, operate, turn things on or off, feeling capable to assess malfunctioning, but it also refers being in control of one's own homely environment. Comfort, experiences of comfort, they vary across time and space. It can relate to issues such as temperature, air quality, lighting, but also to cultural meanings, for instance, in relation to homemaking. And a lack of control over smart grid technologies can impact feelings of safety, for instance, in relation to privacy, health, financial costs, which then negatively impacts comfort and well-being. In terms of trust, that relates to the way, that relates to the functioning of the technologies. But what's relevant to consider is that in residential smart energy systems, there's a lot of trial and error. And then there is often concern not only about the functioning of an individual appliance, but about the whole network, the network of these appliances that together have to form this intelligent system. And because of this complexity, smart grid systems tend to lack transparency. And then when things do not work as intended, this can undermine trust in the technologies and also in the providers of the technologies. So how did we do our research? We analyzed empirical data on experiences based on 2 pilots. The empirical data were collected using interviews, workshops, and focus groups. I already mentioned we also did a short literature review. And the overarching questions are mentioned here. So what are the gendered experiences related to the build-up of this interest and expertise? To what extent is smart grid expertise concentrated with one person within the household? And what are the gendered experiences in relation to comfort, control, safety, and trust? So now we turn to the Dutch cases that we've looked into. I should first mention that our work was qualitative. The pilot research was designed not only to inquire into the gender-related aspects, but it had a broader scope. It was part also of these Horizon projects that we're involved in. Yet we have explicitly invited female residents to participate in the focus groups and interviews. So we analyzed transcribed interviews, and then using the research question, we collected the broader findings for the categories of interest, expertise, control, comfort, safety, and trust. And next we looked at how men and women responded differently or not within each category in order to identify more gender-specific aspects in these experiences. And in addition to this, we also use our own observations during interviews and focus groups, because these also pointed to gendered roles in certain cases. So now for real, we go to the cases. So SchoonSchip is one pilot. SchoonSchip is a success example of a smart energy community in Amsterdam. As you can see, it consists of floating houseboats, arks, which house 46 households. This community consists mostly of households with 2 gendered couples, children living with them. You could characterize them as urban progressive residents, the do-it-yourself type of attitude and lifestyle. They are proud of that as well. They have a strong sense of community and they are idealistic. So they have solar PV, home batteries, heat pumps, and they have like one connection to the grid. A sandbox allowed them to act as an energy supplier within their own community. They aim for energy neutrality, self-consumption, and they also want to connect to other smart grid communities in the neighborhood in the near future. So we did interviews, we did focus groups. Our second case, the Wals in Voorhout. So there we have 33 homes. I hope the picture will appear in a bit. The participants to the interviews and the focus groups were mainly pensioners, and most of them moved into this neighborhood because of the senior homes. that were very attractive to them. So they were more interested in the characteristics of the homes and the surroundings than that they were interested in smart grids. Solar PV panels, home batteries, heat pumps, there's electric vehicles and charging poles still in development, as well as a collective battery, which is planned for the future. The buildings were designed to be net positive, and they also have other smart home features. There you can also see the picture. We had interviews, we had one workshop, and we held 2 focus groups with 11 residents. So we move now to the findings of the SchoonSchip pilot. So I said already that SchoonSchip is a success example of an energy community. And that's also something that the residents express. People consider themselves to be lucky to be part of this community. And when you look at the people who live there, they are very engaged, they're relatively young, they are well resourced in terms of educational backgrounds, income, relations and networks, time, commitment. Yet few respondents were really energy and digitally skilled. Next, when we looked at experienced control, this was addressed in discussions on how residents currently feel in control, and when discussing what they would like to see in order to feel sufficiently in control. So all participants expressed a need for better and more tailored support in monitoring and managing their generation, consumption and storage of energy, but their preferences were quite diverse. So some wanted really detailed data provided through an energy dashboard, and others had a preference for no energy dashboard at all, but rather rules of thumb, so that you know, for instance, that you have to do your laundry when the sun shines, as an example. When we look at how people feel in relation to the smart grid developments already implemented, some of the residents felt not competent, and as a result tended to withdraw or disengage with the smart energy system. And the example in this quote is to illustrate it, is from a female householder who explains how she has feelings of shame about not understanding how it all works. For instance, the energy monitoring app or the hot fill device on the washing machine. And in her case, then a lack of expertise and know-how is increasing, because she feels uncomfortable to ask others for help. What we also noticed is, and that's this other quote, where someone said, well, this lady said, I am forced to deal with all the digital stuff at home and also the technical stuff. I don't know much about it. And then she said, but I found out that some things were not working, and I was wondering, how is it possible that I am the one who's to find out? So she is handling all the digital and technical stuff at home, but she doesn't feel as if she's the one that's really competent, and she's really surprised that she's the one to find out that the batteries are not functioning the way they should. These are just some examples. Overall, what we saw in the SchoonSchip case in terms of accumulation and concentration of smart grid related interest and expertise, we saw uneven patterns, somewhat gendered. When we looked at digital and material housekeeping, there was a clear gap. So those more involved in the digital housekeeping and the technical stuff were less involved in the material and cognitive housekeeping, but this gap was not always along gender lines. And it was interesting because the residents themselves considered this gap also as problematic. Looking at experiences of control, comfort, safety, and or trust, that was not very strongly gendered. There were issues around the battery, overheating, spatial impact of appliances. Experiences of not being in control were sometimes related to having discovered by yourself how things are not working the way they should and not being informed about this. And there were several issues related to trust in both technology and the providers. And those by the providers were then those providing the architecture of the smart grid systems. But there were also questions about the algorithms in the energy management system. SchoonSchip, it was quite a different case, as I will show. But there also the rest is, it's also an innovative smart grid project, and all the respondents, they liked the house very much. They also feel lucky, appreciating how the house is prepared for their old age, space, the view, the garden, the neighbors. In general, there was also appreciation for the project developers and their commitment. However, various issues with the smart energy system and appliances have taken their toll, also in terms of the initial sympathy towards the project developers. Most respondents were not highly energy and digitally skilled, yet the few that were men, not women. Male respondents, moreover, they considered themselves to be the main spokesperson. So in interviews, we explicitly had to invite their wives to also join the conversation. And yeah, so the accumulation of interest and expertise very much was situated with the male householders. We saw different experiences in terms of how control was experienced. Female respondents experience risk to become dependent on their male counterparts or others, and they express their concerns about that and how they feel that they should become more proficient in understanding how it all works. So this quote is illustrating that. Women here also did not appreciate the role that they actually do have in identifying problems related to the smart grid, because also in Voorhout, often it is women that find out that something's not working in the way it should. In terms of accumulation and concentration of smart grid related interests and expertise, that we saw gendered patterns. The same goes for the observed gap between digital and material housekeeping. And looking at experiences of control, comfort, safety, and/or trust, there we also saw gendered patterns. So when it comes to experience control, the picture that emerges is one in which female respondents, they most strongly express that they feel lost at times. So male respondents, they show a stronger inclination to take back control. They were more likely to blame the smart energy system and/or the project developer, regardless of the extent to which they understood what was going on. So female respondents were more likely to withdraw, take their loss, hope for the best, spend another weekend in the cold if necessary. And furthermore, the underperformance of technologies, safety issues, I think of batteries that overheat, a lack of comfort, issues with the heat pump, in combination with a lack of communication and support, show that the trust that residents feel towards the project developer and the smart grid provider has its limits, and these are almost reached in this case. And this last, I will read this one aloud. One lady said, these homes were supposed to allow you to be independent longer. These are senior homes, but that's not how I feel. I mean, I need to be self-reliant, and then I would like to stay here. But if things stay the way they are now, and he passes away, I hope not. But in any case, then I will be gone, then I will leave. So I think these findings, they show that female respondents, they risk to become dependent on others when trying to manage their basic energy-related services in the home as part of their daily practices. The male counterparts take a more active role in accumulating expertise and know-how. And the quote of this respondent, is a bit of a sad illustration of this. So for the promise of these smart, comfortable and safe senior homes to materialize, more work is needed to address the gendered experiences of control, safety and trust. So as a what we see in both cases, we see this overwhelming complexity, and we see new dependencies and risks of being locked out, and risks of undermining control, comfort, safety, and trust in both pilots, we see that there's a concentration of digital and energy related expertise and know-how with one person in a household. And in one case, it was more gendered than in the other. We also saw that those that feel competent, they are more likely to take action to regain control. And that was also gendered, mostly in Voorhout again. The experience of not being in control was gendered, mostly in Voorhout and less so in SchoonSchip. And the same goes for safety and trust. We also need to point out here that gender then intersects, of course, with age and socioeconomic background and educational background. And remember that in Voorhout, people were of older age compared to SchoonSchip. But so what we see is that a lack of expertise can build up over time. And among respondents in both pilots, digital energy expertise tended to be concentrated with one person. In some cases, it was more gendered than in others. But what we will do, for instance, in Voorhout, our upcoming work as JuneWorks in this community, is that we will try to address ways to improve for the women involved and others involved to improve the understandability and also the ability to cope with the smart grid in their homes, so that more people feel competent and are likely to take back control to the extent that's possible. What we see here is that both energy and digital literacy play a role. And while men and women both risk exclusion to some extent, for women this risk is larger to the extent that they overall lag behind in energy and digital literacy. And this then raises the question, how can designers and implementers of residential smart grids take better account of these differences, both from the perspective of distributive justice, as well as from a more instrumental perspective, making these smart grid solutions work? So we need to invite female residents, but we need to actually invite all household members that do not resemble the male reference model. We need to invite everyone more actively in the design, implementation, and monitoring of smart grid experiments. And since smart grid pilots offer an opportunity to collect relevant user experiences, it is key that we make use of these opportunities. And our experience is that in Horizon 22 projects, smart grid projects with still quite a strong technological focus, it's not always easy to do this. But on a positive note, we also found that thanks to our work for this gender and energy task, we started a conversation within the consortia of these projects, and it has become more normalized, if you will, to discuss gender in various phases of the project. And we think that's important, and that's a positive side. So moving towards the final slides. So our work involved qualitative research and literature. We focused on particular communities with specific characteristics, well-resourced, middle class. However, to the extent that we see that these communities already struggle with the complexity and invisibility of smart energy networks in their homes, what is to be expected when residential smart grids are implemented in other contexts, in contexts where people are less well-resourced? And think of, for instance, of energy poverty in relation to gender. So our findings point out the need to understand the implications of scaling up smart grids to other sections of the population, consider issues of digital and energy literacy, access to technologies, and needs of less resource and vulnerable population in the adoption of smart energy technologies. And a few days ago, I also read the term justice literacy. So maybe that is also something to take into account on the part of the developers and the designers of the smart grid configurations. And there we also need to ask, how can we design, how can these processes be shaped in such a way that they enable a more shared learning and more inclusive practices? so that in the end, we can enable household members so that they continue to feel in control of the home environment, and that they get to grips with the smart grid configuration to the extent that they need to be in order to run their households, to co-decide also on who and for whom the smart grid is going to generate value. Issues of institutional responsibility are also relevant. We didn't dive into that, but residents had questions about accountability and responsibility. So, household management and energy management. We see that there, rather than dreaming about the smart grid promise, about a flawless and seamless experience, unburdening, enhanced comfort, ease of use, in control, being able to trust that the smartness of the system will contribute to lower the energy bill, to decarbonization, to the generation of values that matter for households and community. Rather than dreaming of that, what we really need is actively exploring and articulating in each context to what extent value generation and retention can be organized in such a manner that households and communities will not lose out. We need to co-create scenarios together with the diverse envisaged users and stakeholders, enabling people and communities to take up an active role in the design and governance of smart energy systems. And of course, we hope as JUNWorks that we can continue with our work to support this with specific attention to diversity and gender, because what I presented to you today is based on initial work and is but the first step in that direction. Thank you very much. We saved the questions for later, I understood. So I would now like to give back the floor to Hans. And yes, so please, Hans, you can take over.